you all for everyone who was able to make it here today. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our first questions for the day. And then speakers, feel free to answer. Whoever wants to answer first, go ahead and do so. You can fight for it or toss for it, however you want to do that. But generally, first question of the day. Oh, and before I keep going, please share your questions in the chat and so that we can read them off as we go, or if you are brave and you want to speak up, you can go ahead and interrupt at any time. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let our presenters take control here. So speakers, describe your educational, professional background. Tell us about yourselves.
Josh, who's it gonna be first?
I think it's gonna be you, Jamsheed. Go for it.
I say, okay. Seniority or age or whatever. Okay, actually, I haven't checked my LinkedIn in a while, but I'm presuming it's all there. I've got a very different background. I really never chose to be in city management up until, and I'll get a little bit into it a bit later, but my bachelor's degree from way back in the early 1980s is in engineering, in civil engineering. And my interest about in the latter part of that program was reading up on architecture, urban form. Lewis Mumford, if you ever covered that name in any of your studies before, was how places needed to be. And I shied away from the nitty-gritty of engineering and started getting into urban planning, which is what eventually brought me to the US. My bachelor's was from Karachi. It's a mega metropolitan city now, 20 plus million. It wasn't used to be like that when I was there. But my urban planning was at the University of Kansas. My focus back then was transportation planning and urban systems, things like that. But I dabbled a little bit in different schools as well, also at the university, at Kansas, at KU. So I took courses in public administration, which is closest to where you folks are and the things that you're into, and also business school and computer science. And I was trying to do any and everything I could get my hands on. KU public administration, two notable figures, you might recognize their names: Mike Letcher from of course, a city manager of Tucson for a long time, and then a faculty member as well at the U of A. And then closer to where most of you are in the Phoenix area, Ed Zerker is the city manager in Phoenix, another KU graduate. So in fact, I might have had a little bit of an overlap while Ed Zerker was there at KU, and so was I. That's one interesting facet or something that's similar here. So my career has always been mostly in the urban planning, transportation planning, operations, those kinds of areas. It's almost entirely been in the public sector. I have never worked for the private sector ever, which is great. And I wouldn't want to even go there because I love what I'm doing and never expected it to be in the manager's office, but here I am. So initially in Topeka and then in Wichita in the urban planning department, and then in Glendale, Arizona as the transportation director, and again in Glendale, Arizona as the interim assistant city manager. And then I left that place, came to Marana and started as a deputy town manager, and I've been now a town manager for almost 3 years. Next month it'll be 3 years. So that sort of sums it up in terms of the academic and the professional positions that I've held.
Awesome. And then Josh, you want to give a little bit background, and as they're going through their background, see if there's any questions you guys can come up with. If any of you have an interest in urban planning or engineering and you want to dive into that a little bit more with relating to their background, go ahead and be thinking about that.
Right, my turn, Reagan. All right,
Yes.
very good. So thank you for having me. First of all, thank you, Reagan, for setting this up and for the ICMA Student Chapter. This is something I really enjoy doing. Actually, I get to do something usually about once a year with the folks at ASU, and either speaking to a class or joining an ICMA Student Chapter event. So I really look forward to these things. Little known fact, although Jamsheed and I have Marana in common, we never actually worked there together. So we never crossed paths. But congratulations to you, Jamsheed, on your almost 3-year anniversary as a town manager. That's pretty exciting. So I'm just briefly, I'm a Arizona native. I was born and raised in Tempe. Grew up in the East Valley in Tempe and briefly in Chandler and Mesa, but I consider Tempe my hometown. And you'll hear me use this joke over and over again. But like all good Tempe natives, when time came for college, of course I went to U of A. So bear down. So I'm a Wildcat through and through. I got my bachelor's degrees there in psychology and religious studies, and then went on to get my MPA there a number of years ago. Focusing on nonprofits and local government. I was never a political junkie type of person or kid. Some people are like, I was always interested in national politics, and I majored in poli-sci and then went to get my MPA. I didn't know anything about those things. I never had any interest. Really, my interest has always been in community service and public service. I always was interested in volunteering and helping others. And so, like a lot of people, I thought my career was going to take me into the nonprofit realm or maybe higher education. And that was what I thought I was going to do. I thought I wanted to be a professor for a while. In fact, I just started working on my doctorate, so maybe that's somewhere down the road as well. But I really didn't know anything about local government. I never even thought about that there was a level of government that performed those services. It just never even occurred to me, frankly, growing up. And so it wasn't until probably graduate school, actually getting an MPA, that somebody kind of clued me into working as a city manager or in local government might be a career option for me. So the way that actually happened, I consider the start of my public service career. I actually got a job working for U of A when I was pretty young. I ran what I would now call a dial-a-ride transit program. At the time, I didn't know those terms, so I just thought we drove cars around and it was fun. But I worked for U of A in this little group called Safe Ride. So we took people who were like studying late at the library or something, and they wanted to get home safely in the middle of the night, and we would go pick them up. And so I became the director of that program when I was 19. It was like a little microcosm of government because it was run by the student government. And so I kind of consider that the start of my kind of management of government services type of career. I wound up getting an internship in the town of Marana. In between the 2 years of my MPA program, you're required at U of A to get an internship to graduate. And I applied and was rejected or didn't hear back at a lot of places, nonprofit organizations, things like that. And eventually an associate dean who was kind of a mentor of mine at U of A said, hey, why don't you call this guy named Gilbert Davidson? He's the assistant town manager in Marana. Used to be the city manager in Wilcox. He used to be student body president at U of A. Maybe you guys could connect on that. And so I just cold called him. I literally looked up his phone number and just called him up and asked if he needed an intern or knew somebody who did. There was no job posting. There was no internship posting. And yeah, sure enough, those connections played out, and I wound up starting there as an intern. And that just kind of continued on. And before I'd even finished my MPA, I was hired as assistant to the town manager in the town manager's office. I actually had to move all my classes to nighttime so I could work full time because U of A was a daytime program back then for their MPA. So I worked in that capacity for about 4 years. As we went through the Great Recession and people left and we couldn't afford to hire those positions back, I wound up getting more and more responsibilities. So by the time I left, they had created a department for me called Strategic Initiatives. So I was the director of Strategic Initiatives, and that had things like economic development, parts of development services, intergovernmental affairs, communications, special events, and kind of a host of other things under that. I knew I kind of topped out in Marana, that it's very hard to go from being an intern somewhere to being like at the executive level, because people tend to kind of remember you as just being the intern, even if it was 5 years later, and you'd grown a lot. And so I started looking at coming back to the Valley. My wife is from Fountain Hills, and so we thought, okay, maybe East Valley, but there was just no job openings. East Valley was very hard to break into. So I started looking further out and wound up becoming the town manager in Wickenburg, Arizona. I was 28. I was the youngest candidate, and I was the only one that had never been a city manager before. And that's another story for another time, but it was a very strange interview process, but they wound up offering me the job. And I wound up being Wickenburg's town manager for about 5.5 years as well. Again, through connections. After those 5.5 years, I wound up meeting some, someone says they want to hear that story. I will definitely share that story at some point. That I'll just say it involves alcohol and firearms was part of my interview process. So it's pretty exciting. But I wound up meeting some people through that job that had some connections in Chandler. And I'd always thought very highly of Chandler. It always had a great reputation in local government in Arizona, and wound up actually through those connections meeting Marsha Reed, our city manager, and went through their process and eventually was selected when they had a vacancy as their assistant city manager. So I've been here in Chandler since 2017 as assistant city manager, and always thought I'd be an assistant city manager before I was a city manager, but I did it kind of backwards. It just worked out that way, and I truly enjoy it. It's a wonderful organization, and learning new things every day.
So it looks like we have some questions in the chat, and I'm gonna start with the first one that I saw. Who clued you into local gov, Josh?
That's from Tim Gomez over there. Is that who?
Yeah.
Is that?
Uh-huh.
Clued me in. It wasn't him. I'll tell you if that's what he's thinking. Who clued me in? I'm trying to think. Honestly, I think it was just actually getting an internship at a city. Like I did not know what a city manager was or did until I was actually already working for one. I had no concept of what a city was or how that functioned organizationally. And so it was truly a matter of, there was an internship offer that I needed to have an internship for credit. And they were paying like $11 an hour, which was really exciting to me. I think I was making like $7 an hour working for U of A or something. So I was like, oh man, this is going to be great. I'm like rolling in cash at $11 an hour. So I took it, and then as I was there longer, it was just supposed to be for a summer. And then I was like, yeah, this is actually really cool. I really like it. And I was kind of interested in the things that we did and wanted to learn more. And thankfully they let me stay until they hired me on full time.
Perfect. And then another question, having both worked in Marana, how was your experience in working in a fast growing town? What was that like? And then what are the challenges and rewards of working in Marana or a fast growing town?
Yes, Marana has been has grown at a pretty good pace when Josh was here, but also since then. And it is a challenge. In fact, if I were to suggest one of my challenges right now, and one of the questions that Reagan, you had mentioned we should cover, and I could briefly talk about that. My challenge right now is to raise the kinds of funds, revenue sources that allow us to be ahead of that growth. It's a boom period, in spite of the pandemic and the economic problems that are there associated with the pandemic that's going on right now. But population is moving around. People are settling in areas which are traditionally called edge cities, and Marana is an edge city in that sense. If you come and look at Marana right now, you'd see a lot of cotton fields and other agricultural activities going on, but almost all that land is already entitled. If you look at the paper plans, it's got buildings and streets and utilities, everything platted out already, and it's been like that for a very long time. The economy is such right now as those who have the resources are coming in to build. And Marana is one of those places. It's a terrific magnet for at least residential growth in a very big way. How do you stay ahead of it? How do you generate the kinds of revenues ahead of that population coming in? Because you don't want to miss out on this wave of activity, because if you miss it right now, it might go somewhere. It has to go somewhere. So that is our challenge, and it's a terrific time to actually be in the business, because you're trying to figure out, this has never happened before. How do you do it? My challenge is trying to work with both the council, which also has to answer to its constituents. How are you going to raise the sales tax? How are you going to raise that kind of revenue? Protect them, because after all, they are my bosses. They are our bosses. How do you protect them? At the same time, make sure that your projects are such that the current population, which is not necessarily going to benefit from that new infrastructure, how do you get their buy-in to it? And that's where the challenge is. So fun times, actually. I would rather be in this situation than in the busts. I was in Glendale for 8-9 years, and I started out during the boom period. All the recreation and the sports teams and everything was heading in that direction. Westgate was booming. The stadium just got built. And then we had a period of bust. That was the Great Recession. And yes, we had challenges during the boom, and I'd rather be in that sector and try to solve those problems than the bust, which was, as Josh was saying, those were tough times during the recession. People were being laid off, and you had to assume additional duties and responsibilities, but not having the cash to do it. What do? So it's fun to be in a boom place, obviously, for many reasons.
Josh, do you have anything to add to Jamsheed's answer?
You know, the only thing I would add, and everything Jamsheed said is absolutely correct, is, I went through something similar after Marana and Wickenburg too, which had like anemic growth for many, many years. And then all of a sudden started getting very busy as people realized it wasn't really that far from Metro Phoenix. And we had our first ever master plan community that sprang up there while I was there. And I think the biggest challenge, apart from all the resource demands and where do you find the revenue to stay ahead of that growth curve, was getting people culturally okay with the fact that we were going to grow as a city. And Marana went through that many years ago. We were kind of at the tail end of that when I came to Marana, where it was this sense of like, hey, you're not this little farm town anymore. And there's no way we're going to be able to stop that. So there's always a part of the population that's like, I don't want to grow. I want it to be the same way it was when I was a kid and I grew up here 30 years ago. What are you doing to my city? And then having to educate and help people understand that, like, hey, we don't own all this land, and this is privately developable. And a lot of it, as Jamsheed mentioned, is already entitled for development. And we went through that in Wickenburg as well. And it was getting our council okay with that idea of, look, we're going to grow. That much is outside of our control. It's a matter of how do we do it, and what standards do we hold, and how do we make sure that our interests and the future of our city is protected. And that's an emotional conversation for a lot of people, and it takes time to get their mind around that. But that's a big challenge too.
All good points. The staying ahead of the resources, the growth, and then making sure that you're making a city that's protecting your city's interests, or development that protects your interests. So we also had questions. We had a lot of questions come in the meantime. So I'm gonna go back and check those out. Justa, did you see which ones came in next?
Yeah, we have one from piling on top of Tim's question. Who were some of your early mentors, and what advice do you have for building and maintaining those relationships? And that goes out for both Josh and Jamsheed.
Mine are those who hired me in each of the positions, in each of the locations where I got my job. It's been interesting. in each of the places that I've worked at, whether it was in a couple of places in Kansas and Topeka, and then Wichita, then Glendale, Arizona, and then here, I've always been in a position where I've competed for the first position when I'm applying for that new location. But I've always had the opportunity, not opportunity, but the, I guess the privilege of being appointed to the next position up in that same organization. And after that, I've plateaued out and I've got to move on. So the folks who I would look up to are the ones who first brought me into the organization. And in some cases, they are the same folks who then promoted me to the next level up. And in other cases, well, even if it's not them, it's still within that organization. Point being that you have your opportunity to prove yourself. And if they feel that you're doing great work and you're already exceeding those expectations, you're ready for the next level, then they don't need to open it up for a competitive bid type process, and you're promoted within the organization. And I would suggest that is a very interesting takeaway if you would look at it from that perspective. Try to get into a position within an organization that has that career ladder. And if it doesn't, then as you find yourself matured enough, and if you're thinking that you've sort of plateaued out there, you don't have to wait forever for something to open up. If you're able to move on, if you're financially and by family, I mean, being mobile, take advantage of it, because those are the best ways by which you can actually go up to that point, assuming that you're interested in ultimately becoming a town manager or a city manager or somewhere up there leading the organization.
Yeah, so I would agree with everything Jamsheed said. It's the people who first took a chance on you, you know. That's the people I think that are often your first mentors, is people that were willing to kind of gamble and say, I know you're inexperienced, or maybe you're at the beginning of your career, but I'm willing to overlook that, or I see something in you that I think is a spark and there's potential there, and I'm willing to kind of go to bat for you a little bit. And I've tried to do that as I've had opportunities to hire folks too. And sometimes I got beat up bad over it at times too, but in the end it played out the way I thought it would, because I had confidence that person was the right fit, even if they didn't know everything that moment. And then I think the other part of the question was, you know, how do you keep those relationships up over time? And so I still keep in touch with a huge number of my mentors. And, you know, it's not always somebody that you necessarily worked with either, or that hired you. It can be somebody that you just go to for advice. And so I've always been very forward about, you know, calling people up that I thought I had a connection with, or that I wanted to meet, and inviting them to lunch and buying lunch and saying, hey, I just want to get to know more about you and your story. And a lot of times those people became mentors. That was how I wound up in Chandler, frankly, was just to use an example. You know, I was new in Wickenburg as the manager, and I was just kind of looking through who some of our previous managers had been. I didn't know all of them, and I saw a couple names that I was curious about on some paperwork. And one of them was a guy named Dave Siegel, who I didn't know who that was. And I asked some staff who had worked with him, and they said, yeah, I think he's in Chandler now, actually. I think he's like the utilities director in Chandler, but he used to be our city manager many years ago. I think we were about 15 years apart. And so I literally just emailed him out of the blue and said, hey, I've always been interested in Chandler, and I just would love to hear about your time in Wickenburg, and if you could share any lessons with me. And he was super excited to do that. And that wound up being a key person that helped me, you know, get to Chandler. He gave me some insight about it, and was able to talk to some people in the organization and talk me up and things like that too. So you just never know. I never actually worked with the guy. He was retired by the time I actually started working here, but you know, we were able to build that common connection, and he knew some people that knew some people, and that's how a lot of these things work.
I'll just add a little bit to that. It was a bit different in my last assignment, as I became town manager from previously being the deputy. I was as soon as the town manager at that time, Gilbert Davidson, he had to move to take a position with the state of Arizona. He worked for the governor as his chief of staff, or was it called the chief executive officer. I was put in the role of being the interim town manager, and my bosses at that time are 7 elected officials. When you're a deputy or an assistant, whichever one it is, you're really not that close to the elected officials because it's the town manager or the city manager at that point. So they really didn't know me to the extent that they would trust me to be the person running the organization for them. So I'm in this trial period where I don't know whether they're going to go out and solicit and get people to apply, and then I might be one of the applicants. Turns out that at the end of about 2.5, almost 3 months, they said, okay, I think we made up our minds. We'll have an executive session and have a frank conversation with you. I said, that's great. And it led to them saying, okay, you're it. They didn't really want to go out. So it's an interesting dynamic. You're talking about those who you look up to. It's usually one person who's responsible for hiring. But when it comes to the final job, the city manager, town manager job, it's the consensus of usually 7 or 9 or such a number, and it's a major game changer in the way you look at stuff. Because throughout your career, you're going to be answering to one person, one immediate direct report supervisor person, and then it isn't. And as politicians are, even though you may think that it's a nonpartisan place, but at the end of the day, they're all elected officials and they're political animals, and they can be fickle, and they might give you the illusion of this is the direction we need to go, but when it comes to making tough choices, they look at it from different lenses, from different perspectives. And now you got to figure out what are their interests, what ticks them off. That's a whole different way of looking at your job compared to looking up to your one boss. If you're a deputy, or you may be a planner or an engineer, and you always got this one boss, and that's the ultimate person that you really got to make sure you understand where they are. Of course, you've got to understand where the organization's going, but where does this individual expect me to be? And now suddenly you've got 7. This is a very crazy profession. I mean, you work so hard and you go through several layers and levels. And at the end of the day, you really want to be a person working for 7 folks who may be there for 2 years, 4 years, or in my case, I've got a mayor who's been around for 32, 33 years. Do we want to really put all our energies and everything that we got inside to serve these folks? Because at the end of the day, they are your bosses. So think about it.
I think that kind of took us into our next question, the impact of politics on your job, especially with working with a nonpartisan city council. And I'll just let you keep in mind there's people from around the nation in our audience, so they're not all familiar with Arizona nonpartisan and things like that.
Josh, you want to go?
You want me to jump in, Jamsheed, or?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll start off. So, yeah, you know, Jamsheed is absolutely right, and I'm having flashbacks of working for 7 bosses directly as well from my time as a town manager. It is a very different way of looking at the world. You're absolutely right, Jamsheed. It changes your whole perspective. In my case, it took me about 2 weeks for that to kind of really catch on after being appointed town manager, and I thought, boy, I have to grow up really fast, because you have to change your whole way of looking at things, and you have a whole organization looking to you for leadership too. Even when the council's off doing something that's intensely political, they're still, the staff of the organization are still looking at you as the chief executive and going, well, what does this mean? And what do you want us to do? And sometimes you don't know the answer, it hasn't been figured out yet. So it's a very tricky profession, as Jamsheed mentioned. In terms of how much does politics come into play, Absolutely, it comes into play. I guess there's no better way to say that. And certainly from my experience, the larger the organization, the more politics there are involved. Especially here, Chandler is part of a very large metropolitan region, one of the largest regions in America. Chandler, the Phoenix metro area is unique because you have the largest council manager city in America, Phoenix, which is large by any standard. It's the fourth largest city in the United States, kind of is the anchor. But then you have some other really large cities right around it too. You have Glendale, you have Scottsdale, you have Chandler, you have Mesa, Gilbert. Those are all cities that are over 250,000 people. They're all in the top 100 largest cities in the United States. So that's a unique situation. And of course, things get political at times. I've learned there's a lot of looking over the fence at kind of what are other cities doing. There's a hesitancy to want to be first on things because you don't want to get too far out there and kind of get the headline for doing something that's too cutting edge. You want to be innovative, you want to be a leader, but you don't want to get so far out that nobody understands what you're doing or the other cities are looking at you funny. And so there's a lot of that kind of checking each other out a lot of times when decisions are getting made. There's also just a lot of general interest in multiple levels of politics. So when I was in a small city like Wickenburg, they paid a little bit of attention to what the county was doing, what the state legislature was doing. They wanted to know those people, wanted to be involved, even up to Congress. But at a larger city like Chandler, there's a lot more frequent dialogue that happens and a lot more ideology that comes into play with how people behave. At the end, of the day, I think all of them are very pragmatic. They tend to be very practical about the day-to-day problems. But when you get into these philosophical debates about what direction overall we want to go, or what is the meaning of something we're going to do in terms of the national scale, it definitely gets political. And a lot of times I think when you get the council out in front of an audience, they feel like they have to perform a certain way for their constituents. They have to stick true to a message. Even if privately you've had a conversation with them and they're a lot more pragmatic about it, once you put them out in front of an audience at a council meeting, a lot of times they feel like they have to go on record to keep up a certain image. And so not to say they aren't all wonderful people, and that they are. I think they all certainly want what's best for the city, but it's a weird beast, and politics turn people into different types of things the longer that they're in it. So it is absolutely a factor that we are considering. And like Jamsheed said, you have to know where those push points are, what makes them tick and what ticks them off is a great way to put it. Like Jamsheed said, where are those hot button issues for them, so you can know how to kind of navigate around and through those.
To really quickly piggyback on that, if you look at it from the perspective of, the term I want to use is sphere of influence. New elected official comes on board, maybe they have no political agenda, they just want to see parks and beautiful things all around them, and that's what the constituents voted them in for. But once they've taken a position, whether it's in a small city, medium city, or large city, their sphere of influence has suddenly grown. And they get contacted or reached out by other organizations, hoping to see if they would champion a certain cause. Or maybe they themselves realize, oh, maybe I should push for this because I really like something, whatever it is, parks. I want higher quality water than what we're getting over here. I want trails, I want roads built. And you start getting into that situation where this elected official's sphere of influence is now growing because of those connections that they've just made after having been in that new position in that elected office. In the town of Marana, where they did not have term limits, like I said, the guy who's the mayor right now has been an elected official for 33 years. That's as about long as I've been in my entire career. And he's been in an elected office nonstop, whether, of course, the last 15, 20 years as the mayor. That sphere of influence, even though it's a small town, Marana, or 50,000 population, but he's a player in Southern Arizona as far as the politics goes, as far as the regional metropolitan planning organization goes, as far as the political party that he belongs to. So you've got to take all of those things into consideration. They might be fine and not talking about politics from the podium, but you need to know where they're coming from and what their influence level is. Because as you propose ideas, don't forget, their sphere of influence includes other organizations, which will definitely want to chime in into everything that you as a manager would like to propose. So you've got to be very conscious of that.
I'm just gonna bounce around on the questions a little bit. We had a question about what are the qualities you look for in candidates applying for roles in city management? And we have about 20 minutes left, so just letting you know that.
If it's an entry-level job, then I'm not really thinking that this person's going to get into the city management business. Yes, your qualification might be masters in public administration and all that, but what would really help and make the difference, if everything else was equal, the person who has the best understanding of local government from the get-go is the person that I look towards. Because at the end of the day, if you're heading to become the town manager, in the town of Marana, we have 15 departments. And within each department, there are divisions and sections and different aspects of work that we do. A person who's fairly knowledgeable about the span or the width of local government is the person who would have less of that learning curve. You don't want to have a person who comes in and says, oh, wow, you guys do even that? Well, if you're coming in with a master's degree in public administration, there would be a little bit of an expectation in the manager's office that you're not coming that cold. So my advice would be, if there's opportunities for internship, if there's opportunities for taking even courses in your university, whether it's urban planning or even a law degree, not a law degree, but a law course on whether it's land use or any of those things, try to expand the horizon, because getting to the position where you eventually get hired and go through the ranks in the town manager or the city manager's office, that's a little ways away. To get your foot in the door, and if you have a very wide understanding of what local government is, what's the span, that way you can be assigned to do special projects. I'm just going to mention Josh's career has a whole lot to do with that. He got in as an intern, but look at the positions that his boss at that time said, why don't you go and fix this? Why don't you go and fix that? It takes a good wide understanding of local government, which he must have picked up very quickly, for his boss to trust him to do that. That in a very short period, he becomes the director of strategic initiatives. You need to know a whole lot about municipal government to be able to figure out what is strategic about moving this organization from A to B. So be as wide angled as you can possibly be when you're trying to come in. And then you can hone in on any of the other skill sets and impress the boss and go forward. Sorry, Josh, I had to bring that in, but I think you are the best example of that.
Josh, you want to go ahead and bounce off?
Yeah. Thanks for the shout out, Jamsheed. I appreciate it. So, in terms of what do I look for when we're hiring, as Jamsheed mentioned, there's differences depending on what level of position you're hiring for. But I'll say this as a kind of underlying theme that I always look for personally is, we talk about, you probably all heard this, and it's like, well, what's the right fit? Who's the right fit for the organization? And then you all want to like, what does that mean? I don't know. Am I the right fit or not? So how do I define that? So for me, a big part of it, when all else is equal, when they all have the right qualifications, when we've been able to have good interviews with people and everybody seems to be fairly on the same page, is for me is how much do they really want to be here? They could apply for any number of jobs, but how much do they really want to see themselves as part of this specific organization? And I love that moment that happens in interviews, and it's kind of the moment that to me seals the deal a little bit, where you can see somebody kind of gets real about the whole thing. You know, they have either a personal little story they can tell about their connection to your community, or something in particular they're passionate about that your community does or does very well. And there's just that connection there that you can tell they're honest and they're in this for the right reason. This is not just another job for them. This is something that they actually want to make an influence, and they really have that kind of servant's heart, if you will. This becomes, you know, personal for them in a way. And so, you know, being able to figure that out before you come and interview for a position, I think is really important. As Jamsheed said, really understand the breadth and depth of the organization. Look at all the things they do, read everything you can about the organization, try to understand kind of what drives the organization, what's the thing that makes the organization tick, because all cities, all companies have that. And then figure out if that's something that you really connect with on a personal level, and then don't be afraid to share that at the right point in the interview process, because to me, that will endear you to the interview committee, that will resonate with them, that when it comes down to selecting between candidate A and candidate B, that's going to probably tip the scales in your favor most of the time, is that sense of, yeah, this person really gets us, and I can see them really not just treating this like a job, but they're really going to put the time and effort in to take us to the next level, whatever that role may be.
Very well.
I'm going to keep things rolling. We had a question from Crystal. What skills did you bring to your career that you were surprised that you needed them?
When I started assuming more responsible positions, director of a department in a couple places, and then even getting into the manager's office, the handicap I had was in the area of bonds and finance, because I never thought I wasn't looking for a position in city management, and out of my 33 years, the first 25 was where I thought I was going to be, a professional in a certain sub-area of municipal government. And when I was thrust into a situation, I literally mean thrust into the situation of being the interim city manager in Glendale, it was the time when the bust period had just started. We were going through recession, and now you got to figure out not just where the cuts are, but you got to deal with the bonds that were previously issued. You got so much debt. The city of Glendale's debt situation was astronomical. They were on the verge of declaring a municipal corporation going bankrupt. And how do you bring that out of it? So those are crazy moments when you've got to bring in the folks and have a lot of trust in them that they're going to give you the best advice. And at that time, I felt it was a handicap. It was a challenge for me to figure out, am I getting the best advice is the question, because you've got a finance director who's telling you, we should have done this, we should have done that. No, the time's gone now for what you should have done. What are you going to do now? And I don't have the experience because I've never been exposed to that area. So my handicap was trying to understand finance and those kinds of things in a real quick way. It was like drinking from a fire hose for a period of time. And if you can dabble in those areas, of course, if you look at textbooks, of course, they tell you about bonds and stuff like that. That's not what I really mean. But when you get an opportunity as an intern, or when you get your first or second job at a lower level in municipal government, try to seek the opportunity to work with the finance director's office. And that really means a lot, because you're going to do budgets every year. And in your career, you're always going to have a few recessions that will happen. So how are you going to deal with the bad news and deal with the council and the public and raise those funds? So take finance seriously. That's what I would suggest to you.
All right. So Reagan, the question was, what skills did we bring to the position that wound up being important? Is that right?
Or what skills did you bring to your career that you were surprised that you needed them?
Oh, okay. So I have no skills.
I'm sorry.
I don't have any skills, so that's my first problem. So I have, as Jamsheed mentioned, I've built a lot of my career on being like an interim and acting fixer type of person. So I was, I think I'd been there like 4 months full time in Marana, and I was named the acting building official, which was really hilarious to me. I really didn't know at all what that department even did. But we figured it out. And then I was acting economic development director for a while, and then it's followed me my whole career. So when I got to Wickenburg, this is a funny story. They hired me as the town manager. What they forgot to tell me is that by city code, the town manager is also the HR director and the director of the city cemetery. So I didn't know anything about those, and I thought we were just full service. We can hire you and bury you all in the same office, right? What a great setup. But I relied on people that were very much more skilled in those areas than me, and I tried to ask good questions, even now in Chandler. So having been in Chandler about a month back in 2017, I was named acting transportation and development director, then acting development services director, and then right now I'm the acting airport manager too, because we're recruiting an airport manager. So I think it's to Jamsheed's point, you try to be somebody that people look to for those kind of special assignments. And I think the skill to come back to the original question that I brought, because I'm not an engineer, I'm not a planner, I don't have any of those hard technical skills. My undergrad degree's in religion, and psychology. I certainly don't bring anything from those, in a technical sense. But being able to ask good questions, being able to elicit information from people and get people to think and get people to trust you, and that's a hard skill to learn. But it comes from having good communication skills, which starts with good listening. And so I guess I shouldn't have been surprised that those were skills that I brought to the table. But that's always been what's been the hallmark of my career, is being somebody who was a good listener, who could gain people's trust, somebody who could be open and honest with people, someone who could give people a straight story, somebody who could communicate well and clearly what my expectations were. And those skills are applicable to any job you will ever have in any career you ever have, including in every single department in local government. And so that's where I've been very fortunate, is I think mentors of mine and people that I worked for picked up on those things in me and said, even though Josh has really no background in running an airport or running a building safety department, I know that he will get the team calmed, he will get them organized, he will figure out a way that we can continue to deliver great service until we find that permanent person who has that background, however long that lasts. And it's been wonderful to me because I enjoy learning. I love learning about these kind of things. And that's part of what excites me to go to work every day, is I get to learn something new that's in some perhaps, crazy technical field that I never would have had a chance to learn about had I not had those listening skills and those conversational skills that put me in those kind of situations.
I'm gonna keep pulling questions from the chat because we have many, many questions, but I'm gonna merge two of them. So question one, do you find the work-life balance difficult as a city manager? And the other one is, would you ever work for state or federal government? So merge two questions in one, whoever wants to take a stab at work-life balance or working in other levels of government.
Personally, I have a problem in trying to do that. The only reason why I can get a whole lot of work done with very little attention to home is because my daughter is out of the house, she's doing her own thing, and my wife does long hours herself, she's an academic. So it just happens to work out. But had I been a manager a few years ago, then yes, it would have been an issue. And that's just the reflection of the times. I am at a point where I do not have, for example, one of the positions in my office here as an assistant town manager. I've held that position because of budget reasons. So that would have been a relief for me if I could, in fact, put 3 or 4 direct reports or direct departments over there. But I think you basically do take work, home. And you do wake up thinking, oh my gosh, it's a work day today, right? Okay, what is it today? Wednesday. Oh gosh, I've got to do this. And those are sometimes the first thoughts that come to my mind when I wake up. I've tried different things and I eventually end up just getting this cluster of what's my calendar like today and how quickly do I have to get ready for that. That does happen. Now, maybe it's me and I'm a bit unorganized perhaps, I don't know, but it is a factor. So if you're in your youth and trying to climb that ladder and you've got a bunch of things, you've got too many irons in the fire, it will require you to take your thoughts, your working life home, and it's going to be part of it. I don't think you can just shut it off. You're in the public sector, ultimately your bosses are elected officials, and I send emails over the weekend. Sometimes I tell them, you don't need to respond to me right now, but I have a thought and I have to put it down. So I'll send emails to those, and my staff, they understand. If I say, I need an answer as soon as possible, that really means it's a Saturday, that's okay. They're gonna think it through, give me an answer, because that's the way local government does operate. It's a 24/7 operation. Your utilities are 24/7 operation. Your police department is 24 operation. So you've got all of these issues going on. Something's gonna happen in the middle of the night. You have to be responsible. So yes, work life, it balances out, but you gotta have a mindset to accept that and a family that supports it.
Josh, on work-life balance?
Yeah, so maybe I'll answer the second question first about, because the work-life one's a little bit longer answer, but yeah, I would never say never about working in the state and federal government, just to be honest. I mean, I don't know where my career is going to take me, whatever. For me, it's not so much at this point in my career about a position title or a specific role. It's more about your ability to make a positive impact. Like I said, I'm a real service first kind of guy. I've never really cared that much about title or money or anything like that. I really like the idea that we can see positive change in our communities and in the world. So if there were the right role where that was possible, I never say never, but I'm very happy with the city of Chandler and feel very blessed to be here. So on the work-life balance question, I learned a lot of hard lessons in this, and I'll just tell you what happened with me. So, I'd always been a really hard worker and kind of a workaholic type. I was always the kind of person who was going into the office on weekends. I started my career like Jamsheed before we had, iPhones, and BlackBerry was the first one I remember having, that they gave me at work, where you could actually like email from home and stuff like that. And it was really funny. We didn't have that at the beginning, but I've always been the kind of person that just wanted to take care of stuff right away. When I took the job in Wickenburg, my wife was very pregnant with our first child, and was like, what are we doing? Like, why are we moving to the middle of nowhere, while I have this baby? And so we wound up moving when he was like a week old to Wickenburg full time, renting out our house in Marana, renting a place in Wickenburg. And it was extremely stressful trying to become a new dad and then or a parent for the first time, and then be a city manager for the first time. Talk about two major life changes and two huge demands on your time. And of course, family's got to come first. But I found that even when, to Jamsheed's point, even when I was with my family and I was not at work, it's all I could think about all the time. And it's just very hard to turn that off. Even though I was physically present, I wasn't mentally present. I was always thinking about some budget issue, or how I was going to have that difficult conversation with a council member, or what are we going to do about this problem or this citizen issue or whatever. In fact, when I got out of that and became an assistant manager in Chandler, and a lot of that, it went down considerably because it goes to the city manager first before it would hit me. I almost felt like I was doing something wrong, because I was so used after 5 years to kind of having it always on my mind of work, even at nights and weekends, I was like, wait a minute, I must be missing something. I must not be doing a good job because I'm not thinking about work all the time. And I actually can kind of turn my brain off for a little bit when I get home. That takes a severe physical and mental toll on you. And frankly, after it was all done, I started having a lot of health issues that I frankly attribute back to just killing myself hours wise. I would usually stay up in Wickenburg till about midnight, following up on council issues, writing a report for council, getting council agenda memos reviewed, because you're just, it's just you in a small community and so much of it falls onto your head. My city manager's office in Wickenburg was me and a half-time admin assistant. I mean, that was the entire office. So everything kind of falls on your lap. And then I would get up at 5 a.m. because we started at 7 there. We were on 410s. So I'd get up at 5 a.m., maybe try to walk or go to the gym for like a little bit and then go to work. And I do that like every day for the most part, and then work through the weekends as well. And it takes a toll on you. I'm very lucky my wife didn't walk out on us. You kind of learn to figure out how to balance things out a little better over time and just be a little calmer and more patient about things. A lot of times I found I put more pressure on myself to perform quickly and efficiently and get things done right away. And a lot of times those things are not, unless it says ASAP, a lot of times it's something that, hey, it's okay to let it go till Monday and take the time with your family and try to have a little balance. You're going to be working for a long time, but your family and your kids are only going to be there once. So you have to just be disciplined enough to make that priority in your mind.
The sort of way to help the situation so that there's some sense of personal life that's there is to surround yourself with a team. And to have a team, you've got to construct a team, have the right folks with you, the right folks on the bus going in the right direction. That way, and this is my style, and it could well be a thing that others can also look towards, is surround yourself with folks who you can then frankly come and say in a room, look, this is the problem. I want you to figure this out. Let's put our heads together. Don't try to solve it entirely on your own. Ultimately, as a city manager, it's a very lonely job because your bosses, you just can't chit chat with them and say, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? You've got to be a little bit more definitive about it. So you've got to have your team, all the other directors and the HR folks and the finance people and the legal people, use them. Bounce ideas off, let somebody play devil's advocate, and that's how you come up with those solutions so that you're not feeling alone and try to solve your problems in the middle of the night. Try to do it with a team, and that's one way to do it. The other point that comes to mind is actually following Josh's situation, a manager first and now an assistant. If I got paid the same, I would love to be the assistant, because then I'd have one boss, and that would be awesome, instead of trying to figure this out of where's the majority, because you always have to count up to 4 to get your quorum to see where the majority is on almost all your kinds of issues. As an assistant, you're not running a department, you're not running the town, you're smack in the middle, you're in the middle of all the action, you are the counselor for so many other folks, you're an advisor, people look up to you, but you don't have to be the one who's directly answering those elected officials all the time. So it's a great position to be in. The longer you are there, the better off you are. Anyways.
Well, thank you both for your time today. I know Josh has to hop off right now, but he did say he would be willing to take any questions, and I can jot down the questions that didn't get answered today. Jamsheed, would you, if I made a list of questions, could I send you those questions? And
I have another. I can give you another 15 minutes over here, or we can do it offline. Either ways. I know Josh will get on to another meeting.
Right. Does everybody else have the time, or I perhaps it would be better if we just stuck to schedule for the sake of everybody else's time. But yeah, I will copy the questions down, send them to you both, and you guys can take a stab at that.
Okay.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for being here. And thank you all to everyone who was able to attend. Mary Jo, don't close out of the chat yet.
Absolutely. This is a great thing. I can be available to each of you as a group or each of you individually anytime. Glad to do that. We do have an internship program, what's it called, the Scholar through the UFA program. We got the ACMA doing the Andrews Scholar, and glad to visit with you if we ever had any questions about your career and where you need to go.
Likewise, Reagan and everybody, thanks so much for the opportunity. And if anybody has offline questions or wants to discuss anything, or if you want to come by and get a tour of City Hall sometime or get lunch or whatever, we're always happy to host you, and would love to learn more about each of you as well.
The tours are pretty cool. I remember touring City Hall there. All right, I've copied the questions, so I'll let everybody get on with their day. Thank you all again, and we will tune in. There's going to be one more event after this. We'll send out the details in an email, so we'll follow up.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Great job, Reagan.
Thanks, guys. I'm like, oh,